Oh, Foxy, it's your birthday. Not for real, just for play. This is Cree Summer, and Moana Nui will be right back.
I could have. That's the team. You all are so perfect. But essentially, I'm not going to go through this for the sake of time, but this racial identity model is what he refers to as a process of becoming black. And what we essentially see, and again, I want to just preface this by saying, everybody doesn't experience this, everybody doesn't experience it in the same way. It's not linear, right? Like, it can be all over the place. But essentially, the idea is that we move from a space where we don't see our blackness as unique. You sort of see yourself as just like everyone else. You don't see color, which is a conversation for a different day. But we move from that to what we deem a more balanced of blackness. In the middle of this sort of identity journey is what we call immersion and immersion, which is where black people are like, I don't want to be around nobody but people who look like me. All the white people can kick rocks. All the people who are not black can kick rocks. And I'm not here to say that that's good, bad, or otherwise. It just is what it is, because sometimes selective sort of segregating, like I'm choosing to be around people who look like me, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that. I don't. Some people may have different opinions, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But essentially, where this model hopes people will get is to, again, to this more balanced identity where you understand that black people can be raggedy, white people can be raggedy, everybody can be raggedy. Like, everybody is sort of unique, and we have to take and value each individual as who they are as an individual, not as sort of like a stereotype. And so that is the idea about magnificence and the process of becoming black. You get to a place where you understand and acknowledge racism exists, inequity exists, white supremacy exists, but you don't say that all white people need to like go away because of it. Does this make sense? Excellent. Yes.
Like the counter-conversion that you have to come back throughout the process?
Yes. Yes, it's cyclical.
And ideally, it will change every time it comes back. Right?
And most often it is, I don't like this word because it's been like overused, triggered by events, right? So like I would argue 2020 was an event. Like the murder of George Floyd, the murder of Breonna Taylor, those were events that often serve as catalysts for people to move through this cycle. So I absolutely went back to stage 3 in 2020, and my husband is white. And it was a time. It was a time.
East Wing, West Wing.
Yes, it was a time. And again, I would like to think I'm more sort of like stage 4, stage 5 now. But I definitely was in a space in my life. In college, I was in a space in my life where I didn't want to hang around with nobody except black people. I went to school in Kentucky, so.
Tough.
Does that make sense?
Right? Sorry.
So the last thing I'll say again, and just so we don't end on such a, again, it's not going to be said the whole time, to sort of tee up this conversation about representation. So racial trauma is a thing that exists. What we don't want to sort of convey is that we cannot overcome it. And I don't say that in any sort of Pollyanna way, like if we just believe everything will be fine. Absolutely not. What I do want to say, and what I say to my clients, what I say to my students, anybody I work with who is marginalized, is that we do have more power internally than we know. And we can heal ourselves internally while not taking on the burden of solving racism, because that's not my job to do. That's not my job to do. But what I can do is have power within myself to view my blackness or view my insert marginalized identity in a positive and affirming way. And the way that we can do that is through what we call positive racial socialization. So children seeing T'Challa on screen, right? Like black children seeing a powerful black character, that is what we call a positive racial experience, as opposed to only seeing black men that are incarcerated, that are enslaved, you know what I'm saying? Or insert stereotype, right? So we can heal from racial trauma, and representation can help us to do that. And so I'm going to actually stop there and turn it over to Dr. Lauren Chapello, who's going to talk a little bit more about why representation is so important and what that looks like in comics.
Yeah, so on the basis, Vanessa was, as usual, killing it, right?
Absolutely. That's right.
I know, my heart's all fluttered. So, I mean, this concept though, you're gonna see the psychology nerd come out here, and I'm gonna try and rein it in, I promise.
Don't do that. Let it out.
We've only got, I'm gonna be here for 3 hours as we do that. But this concept, y'all, of how becoming black or blackness as we see it is impacted by the world around us, by the things that we see, by the examples we are given of ourselves so significantly impacts. And now let's compound this concept for these other intersecting identities, queerness, ability level, ability to get pregnant, all these other concepts that wrap into who we are. And so, hey, that's me. I am an awesome graphics guy. I can't draw, but there's that. When I start to, next slide please, when I start to ask this question of, so where did I start to see representation? And why are we, moreover, even talking about this? It's because of all of these amazing pieces of research that the panel is already talking about and will continue to talk about. As I see myself, I'm able to reflect back, yeah, this makes sense. It's not really me. I'm scared of heights, for example. So superheroes that fly, that's not my jam. I love that for you. That's just not my personal journey. But maybe another superhero that's got like a secret layer where they can do like sciencey things and there's a beaker going on. I don't know, I got like a B- in biology, but I can see myself reflected in these things, even if it doesn't quite match with my identity, right? And so why are we talking about this? It boils down to, because if I can see it, I can believe it. Now I know that sounds like an after-school special, and I probably didn't make that phrase up, but it remains to be true. Next slide, please. As we go to my second question, is where do we even begin? I know I look like an anime villain there. I feel really good. I promise I'm super nice. Sometimes. Ooh.
It's gotta be. It's gotta be.
Can you not read my diary out loud on the show, please? Sorry. At any rate, so where do we even begin, right? Next slide, please. I want you to hold tight with me here. I started in the 1930s, which stressed me out. I felt it right here. It gave me heartburn. So, I just want to pause for that. As we're starting to see black characters, I went all the way back in the time, like before men said, okay? In the 1930s, we started seeing black characters, in particular a gentleman named Lothar, right, as sidekicks, you feel me? So what types of things did Lothar do? He wasn't really sitting in front of a fireplace with like a velvet jacket on, like just, smoking a cigar or a pipe, right? Like kids don't smoke, that's not good for you. But he was more being the strong man. He was cannon fodder, if you will. Lothar was the guy that you sent in when the actual hero, quote unquote, Mandrake the magician, couldn't really handle the initial volley of violence that was being thrown at him. We saw similar things in the Red Mask. Now, as with a lot of things that we go through in our society, there was a bit of a pendulum swing. In the 1940s, all Negro comics, I kind of affectionately call that for us, by us comics. These were, okay? Another phrase I totally didn't come up with. These were folks that were saying, we're tired of the loincloth depiction. We want to write our own comics. We want to have more breadth, different examples of us and these stories. And that lasted, as you can see, not very many issues. There's a lot to unpack there. I would argue it's not due to lack of interest, but probably other sociological things that I'm sure you can imagine in the 1940s. Moving forward to the 1950s, there's that pendulum swing all the way back, right? Back to loincloths. Taking a look at Jungle Tales should be a really good example of that. Next slide, please. When that bad boy swung back, when that bad boy swung back, the swinging was swinging. That doesn't make any sense, but I think
No. We understood that.
Okay.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
That was very knowledgeable. Yeah, so we come to 1966 now, the example that I'm wearing a necklace of it. Oftentimes when people talk about representation in comics, it's one of the first things that we go to, right? So now we're starting to see characters that, well, wait a minute, they're good in science. They're not just strong. There's nothing wrong with strength. But but they're also good in these other ways. They're leaders. They have entire nations that they're ruling, they're engaging in. They're engaging in international politics on some levels. And on other examples, they're whooping ass. To arguably, at that time, 4 of the more powerful folks in that particular universe, right? Next slide, please. As we continue rolling, it's no longer a pendulum, it was kind of becoming a clock and just kept on going up, up, up. So we start seeing things like Luke Cage out here in these streets, and his edges were on point. So I don't know if it was wrong, but they were having very cultural conversations, and I appreciate that. So there was also representation of what people can look like. Oh, I can be out here, you know, in a hairstyle that's representative of my culture. It's not just necessarily a white hairstyle that's been painted brown. As you go forward though, next slide please, you start to see something else. A lot of these people that I've been talking about are men, or people who are very masculine coded, right? Now we start to see other feminine heroes. We start to see women heroes. We start to see other types of representation, which blows the lid off the entire pot. But as I mentioned, that swing, now it's becoming kind of a clock, we start seeing a blaxploitation era. This is where you're getting, I don't know, 8 out of 10 heroes are black something. Black water bottle, black lightning, black chair, black t-shirt, all of these other things. Nothing wrong with the word black, it's not a dirty word necessarily, but I'm sure you can see kind of where we're going here. Next slide please. When we start moving through and past that blaxploitation era, this is when things start getting set off, in one person's opinion. My bias is showing here. 1980s, when you start to see folks like Cyborg, now we're getting differences in age. You're starting to see different abilities. People are coming out with different things that they're just good at. Next slide, please. And then we hit the 90s. Here's a personal favorite for me. Milestone Comics, after we started seeing more representation across age, across gender, across ability level, across differences in the things that the folks could do, their superpowers, their strengths, if you were, their weaknesses as well. Milestone was the one for me that, as I was a kiddo, in what some of my adolescent clients refer to as the 1900s. Stop. Get out of my office. I'm just kidding. But like that hurts. It's okay. I'm going to use my own coping skills here. The things that I look back upon in the 90s, as far as being representative of social examples of what blackness could look like, across basically a large spectrum, success as well as folks that were struggling, that were trying to just survive. So for me, growing up outside of Chicago, as a youth in the 1900s, there's that heartburn again.
It's like late 1900s.
The late 20th century. I love that, sorry. My bad. That's something not related? Okay, perfect. As a person who was growing up in the late 20th century, though, I can see myself reflected in Peter Parker. A young boy, grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, lower SES, and then found a multi-million-dollar corporation to get an amazing full-time internship at that probably paid for maybe him and his auntie to be able to live where they were living. That was not a reflection of what I was seeing. Milestone started talking about other sociological things that were going on. There were heroes, no spoilers necessarily, but there were heroes that were struggling with substance use disorders. There were heroes that were working through unplanned pregnancies. There were heroes, I really don't like when he's framed as like the Black Superman, because Icon is way and above all of those things, but it talked about the differences between one super baby being plummeted to earth with his skin tone versus a second Icon being plummeted to earth with his skin tone in the 1800s and how he grew up. It was not awesome Smallville type stuff, as I'm sure you can imagine. Next slide, please. This concept, though, of course, it snowballed. You start seeing improvements in diversity across sociological factors, ability levels, strengths. Next slide, please. The things that the characters are talking about and addressing. That's super cool, I know. And so once we get to the 2000s, this is where now Wakanda sets it up. Next slide, please. we started seeing so many differences in what kiddos are able to imagine when they see themselves. They can see themselves as a strong warrior, a nerdy scientist, a person that has social anxiety, all of these other things that arguably other kiddos were able to see represented decades prior. Next slide, please. And as you take a look at how that cultural influence impacted, well, it's not just necessarily Black Panther, it's not just Wakanda, it's all of those things rolled into one. And this is how, of course, we start seeing these conversations about Blackness in cosplay, right? Where some folks are trying to shout down, oh, well, you got the race wrong for that particular character. No, if I want to be Hellgirl's going to be Black today. Next slide, please. That's the next slide.
Snap all that information right there.
I'm gonna just climb a little bit of
Shout out to everything.
Oh, yeah. Another Midwest guy. That's me. That's what I do. Come talk to me.
And now we will have the hardest working man in comics talk to us about all the things that he does. He does all the things.
I do a bunch. I like how you said that like we about to have a word. When I started Vantage In-House, the key impetus of it all was control. I am a born and raised Midwesterner who found comic books fairly late. I was 10 years old and discovered comic books through the death of Superman. And like many others, like I didn't like to read traditional books as a child, and comic books changed all that. And when it changed all that, it opened up all kinds of doors and opportunities that not only did I recognize, I wanted to proliferate for other people. So I was the guy that tried to find different ways to be in the comic book business than traditional routes that were either stated or defined for me as a creative and also as a Black creative. Because again, not a monolith, right? So there's different things that I've done in the business to kind of change exactly what I think is possible for other people. I started with Vantage In-House Productions, which is my publishing imprint. Like I said, I've been publishing full-time for the last 14 years. It's home about 10 titles, including Wonder Care Presents the Kindergartens, an all-ages friendly title, The Samaritan, which is the series that kicked off everything. It's a bit more mature, and then also The Trouble With Love, which is a little bit more critically acclaimed but young adult focused. The whole point idea there is with that sensibility of control, I could tell whatever stories I wanted to. It wasn't a matter of saying, because I'm Black, I can only tell Black stories, which has often been a thing that has been delegated to us. Not to say that people that are Black and want to tell Black stories, that they are incapable of telling other stories, but it's often expected that we only tell Black stories. And personally, I want to get to the place where there's this feeling and thought process of homogeny that says, I don't have to tell you that I created a Black character. It just is a good character. And you will just accept that fact that it's good, beyond just the statement of, hey, it's Black also, pick it up. I want to see that space and place where you accept good characters because they're good characters, period. To that end, like I said, I create a lot of different titles that feature different age groups. And I also started to look at how do I teach people the value of comics at the same time. Wait, one more.
Right here.
Here we go. As you can see, like there's a range of title structures that I have. Things that I aim to invoke different readerships. The idea that you could start with Wonder Care Presents the Kindergartens, which is essentially Muppet Babies meets the Justice League, and you can grow into reading the Samaritan series, which again is a little bit more hardcore. How many of you saw the Marvel Luke Cage series on Netflix? Okay, that's like a multi-million-dollar commercial for my comic. I didn't have to pay for it. But literally, if you watch the first 3 episodes, it is my series, The Samaritan, and no shade whatsoever. With all due respect, I do think that I got a shout out in the second episode, I'm not gonna lie. There's a dude getting his haircut, and for no reason, his name is Victor, and he never appears in the series ever again, so I'm just saying, it's a little shout out to but that also like feeds into that conversation. It's the lack of monolithic aspects. They're not in competition with me either, right? We can collectively build an audience, which is something else that I actively try to promote amongst Black creators in the comic book space, specifically the independents. There are many of us. There's many of us in this room. Jason, I see you. Big shout out. Moana, I see you. Big shout out. So in that sense of the way that we do things, again, not a monolithic point of view. One of the things that I did as a comic book creator is I specifically stayed away from Black-oriented Comic-Con events. It's not a shade. What it was that I wanted to make sure that for myself, I was good in whatever room I walked into. As a Black man, I fully understand that people readily look for any excuse to devalue my accomplishments, right? So you're only good in Black rooms. But if Frank Miller's here, does he know you? Yes, he does. I've made sure that Frank Miller does exactly that. As does Jeff Johns, as does Dan DiDio, Mark Miller. Like, these people are folks that I have opened up doors to. That's what I'm here for. I've made sure that when I walk into any Comic-Con space, I am a notable figure. What it also means is that when I'm in those spaces and I can open back those doors for my fellow Black creators that might have gone in the more traditional Black Comic-Con route, they have a path that they can get to be invited into those spaces that maybe they didn't explore right away or might seem closed off to them due to whatever idiosyncrasies other people want to put upon them. They don't have to suffer those because I'm in that room. I will keep that door open, and if that door is not open, I will break that window, and if that window won't open, I'll knock down that wall. That is what we do. So through Vantage In-House, that has been a key factor of what I've aimed to do is to disseminate, break down the rules of things, using my own sensibilities of control, what I want to do in order to do it. One of the new things that I'm doing as an initiative is a series called Cards, and I'm changing the value of what we expect comic books to look like. It's a trading card, right? The goal here, of course, is to promote to kids. We want kids, we need new readers. That's a big thing. Obviously, the Kindergartens, super cute name, is supposed to appeal to kids. But we're not seeing kids at comic shops like we used to, right? First of all, we're not seeing comic shops like we used to. That's the moment it's not. But the idea is that kids aren't encouraged to take a comic book, roll it up, put it in their back pocket, ride along with it, share it with a friend. Comics have too much value now, right? They're collectible items. They're not the things that just people can enjoy. Trading cards are different. You can have a collection of Pokemon cards, sure, but you can also have a bunch of the same card that you don't mind if it gets a little dirty, rugged, whatever. So what I've done is I've made trading cards with QR codes on the back with my books as a digital commodity. Something that you can scan, you have with you on your phones, because all these kids in this 21st century, they all have devices that scan things, and so they can scan it, get the book, and then give it to somebody else. So now we're changing distribution in a way that is more grassroots, more hand-to-hand, and just people get to expose each other to the things that they love. Again, all of this is based on the idea of this is what I started in terms of having a collection of multiple things, and now we're going into not just titles of difference, but formats of difference as well. Still comic books, of course, but we can change exactly what we do with it and how it impacts other people. Now, as I mentioned before, the Samaritan was how I started off my entire imprint. Again, even though I recognize that, or I look at myself as a Black creator being what I am, not necessarily who I am, I did happen to start off with a Black comic book. It was a total happenstance. It wasn't the first book that I wrote for my imprint to release, but it's the first one that was ready to come out. And in this one, the Samaritan, what we have is this character Smith. No costume, no code name, right? Moves into a crime-ridden neighborhood and starts systematically cleaning it up. But it's a commentary. Right? Commentary on what we all hope and expect that we can do to our communities in ways that we might not have ever done. Right? We affect different ailments that plague, humanity. Right? So we have child abuse, we have domestic violence, there's drug use, there's all these different aspects. And if only we could actually, knock those things down in the same way that Luke Cage often tries to, showcase. I want to do my version of it. What I can tell you right now is I'm a big fan of the idea of if I get my work in a certain places and spaces, then it eliminates anybody else's opportunity to steal that idea, right? If I've got it out there already, I don't have to worry about somebody else taking it. You already know I did it. How many of you saw the Sylvester Stallone movie Samaritan? I got calls regularly on whether or not that was based on my book. Thankfully, it's not at all, and thankfully. But with all due respect to Bragi True, who was the creator or co-creator of that series, what it showed me was that my efforts to showcase my voice and my characterizations are working because other people were ready to go at him, saying you stole from Victor. That's not cool. He did not. He did. I swear he did. Graciously, he did not. Okay, so when it comes to the You Create Comics line, I'll tell you the secret origin that I rarely tell people, but it's super duper important. I was working for a company, I will not name it, but they had this idea of creating comic book characters for kids. Kids would come in, fill all this information out, and then they would ship it off to semi-pro talents, and we would create characters and send it back. And the kid is supposed to be super excited because this character, sometimes based off of themselves, is now a comic book. And I said, y'all missed it. You missed the point. One of the things that makes us all comic fans is that childlike feeling of creativity, right? Those of us that have taken this into the career space, we fully understand that every time we sit down to create something, we're kids again. And the thing is that we should empower kids to not just see work done for them, but to have work done by them. And that's the thing that Create Comics is all about, literally in the name. You create these comics. The goal is to have you not think in the context of when I grow up, but what am I going to do today? What am I going to create today? What am I going to keep creating? And it was something that, if you remember as a kid, how many of you just randomly created stories? Right? Why just stop? That's that hard part. You know I got this. Stop playing. You know I got this. But the idea here is, if we start on an educational level, we encourage people in the classroom that you can create, and it can be something worthwhile. There's a wonderful comic series called Axtile that was very popular a few years ago. One of the co-creators, co-writers of that series was a 5-year-old. There's nothing to stop you from actually being successfully creative, even at a young age, even in a classroom setting. So I created workshops and programming content, art supplies to build that context up for people to showcase, like, hey, you don't have to wait till you're older. Comic books are real literature. You can actually do anything and everything that you set your mind to. You just have to decide to do it. Again, that nature of control, sending it out into the world for other people to say, I can make those same decisions for myself, by myself, and uplift myself for my own creative ventures. Since we don't got a little bit of time, you skip over and keep going.
Okay.
Yes.
So we do have time for questions. What questions do you have?
What y'all got?
Run a nonprofit called Hero Free. We believe in encouraging kids from pre-K up to high school.
Thank you.
Comic books. Because I would think about everything, but eventually I needed novels and everything. And I was like, well, every month, every week, so much that counts. But one thing I noticed when it comes to a lot of the conversation about encouraging kids to read has always been this comics aren't for that. And one thing my work kind of seeks to fight is that idea. Because the reality is, when a teacher goes up to a kid and says, that doesn't count, immediately they shut down. Meanwhile, when my work goes to a community center and we're, hang out with kids, do a little art project, and then at the end of it, we get a comic to take home. And believe it or not, plain old Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and My Little Pony are our two biggest.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Immediately out of the hands every time. And the little girls are our biggest customers. They lock in. So, we're encouraging them to do that. I'm just wondering how we really push that message. Why? Because if you look on TikTok, you would swear that every one of these kids is literate. And we have to get to a point where we're saying, look, we need to read something. And I'm wondering how we get over that hump. And I'm curious to know what you're doing, because I think that there's a lot of alignment there, and it's fascinating, and it's something that I really I think you're not going to all the other learning, all that other like media literacy, it all starts with being.
Well, if I can make a recommendation, bring them to events like this. Now, obviously, to scale and cost, that's not feasible for all things, but find those places and spaces near you that have a focus on comics as a viable literary context. So that way it's not just you speaking in a vacuum saying this is true. You're the echo of what somebody else has said and shown, because that's their job. So like as they're setting this up for you, you ride that coattail and go, see, I told you. And it becomes easier to make that argument of, look at the business structure of it. Look at the literary contextual value of this. Look at the social value of this. Can you learn something about a place because you read a comic about that place or featured that place, whether real or imagined? Don't take the burden of trying to showcase it just by yourself. Find other places that are already doing it for you.
And I'll just say very quickly, because I want to make sure we get to other questions as well. This is sort of like a higher level, what do we do about this? But my question is, when someone says comics are not literature, says who? Because typically the standards that we have, and this is as someone who was the highest level of academia, right? Those standards are made by people who have a very specific worldview. So like, everybody up in here read like The Hatchet in elementary middle school. The heck? Like, who said The Great Gatsby? You know what I'm saying? Why is that literature? But like African folklore is not, right? You know what I'm saying? And I think that those, once you really challenge, and I don't say challenge, I'm trying to use non-violent language, once you invite people to think about that, you get real racist real quick, but it's like, why is this literature, right? And so that's another thing that I invite you to, you know what I'm saying? Think about just sort of like on a larger, more abstract scale.
I don't know, so Sam, okay.
I think we're gonna get you and then we'll go in depth order.
Okay.
So, my wife's an English professor,
Okay.
literally sitting across the table. She says comics are literature. I say, no, comics are comics. Some comics are literary,
Yes.
but comics are not literature. They're a separate medium. The way literature
Yes.
makes meaning
Yes.
is the words, whereas the way comics make meaning in relationships.
Yes.
So I always say, no, comics are not literature.
And I think what you're pointing to is that we can acknowledge difference without devaluing it.
Yeah.
And that's the issue with racism, all kinds of inequity, right? Like, difference is here, difference is not hierarchical. And when we get to a place where we can view difference because colorblindness is not the way, it's not the way. When we reach equity, we will be able to say comics, black, white, gay, straight is different, but it's not better or worse. We're not placing a value on it. Does that make sense?
And sometimes that difference, I think, is reflected in like how we use it. So I do therapy with folks, right? That's my daytime gig. I use comics and therapy. Guess what? There's full types. The CBT is not for everybody, and that's okay. But she's like my version of Libra. And she has degrees as well. We're really into that. But yeah, so I mean, I use comics in therapy, you know, because those stories can be a reflection of your story. Differences, I love how you put that, are here. They're not necessarily in a space where we have to devalue a comic book as a school teacher in order to uplift The Great Gatsby. That story's got plenty to play. What about The Watchmen? What about Victor stuff?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
We got time to
Yes.
Yeah, hi. First of all, shout out to Oscar and Love. I think Wide Side is one of the great arcs in comics history. But just, I also teach U.S. history, early U.S. history and comics history here at local university. And something I'm part of communicating in both classes is the creativity and the uses of and the kind of broader context for Black language, basically to a mainly white Latino population. Are there great current titles that would build characters here? Because this is one song, and I it's a wonderful song, amazing, but it's one song, because of other pieces of my life.
So as a resource for, you're saying,
Basic college level students, they say, oh, English, you should this, why are you so angry? There's this trope that's even very difficult. There's a lot of power, and there's a reason for it.
Right.
Historically, for a lot of power. I want like economically, I think quick readings that will help us understand, here's a broader context, here's some of the power to go see, here are the pitfalls. If that's helpful, but, you know, and it's of course only one small piece of the Black experience and culture. Getting down there to something, this they get you inside a person's head, you know, that inside their lives a little better.
to pick a quick read that will do that for a total sense is difficult. You would have to pick like runs of things to kind of showcase. Like we've talked about this before, where with Miles Morales, like there's this great showcase of the Black Spider-Man, but then there's a specific story piece where he's like, I don't want to be the Black Spider-Man. Well, take that issue out, let's throw that out, because it's not going to quite fit the right context of what it is that you're trying to expose people to. So it's a little difficult to say, just read this thing. The idea would be have them actively sample blackness as their context, because if you're feeding it to them, it still only limits what it is that they experience, because the perspective is only built on what you've given them. But if you give them the parameters of saying, try to find X, Y, Z, now it's wide open and they have to kind of discern for themselves what is appropriate and what is not.
I think promoting autonomy in that search is a huge piece of that. So what does it mean for you?
There it is, there it is.
As opposed to, I mean, I could go in there as a Black woman and pick my top 10 issues that just exude Blackness, but that does not necessarily reflect to Vanessa or Victor's perception. Because I've got my own, I'm looking through my worldview.
Thank you all so much. Y'all are the best. We'll be in the hallway.
So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will.
If this the land of the free, it was a freedom then, when they annexed Hawaii and called it Cedar Lands, without any type of payment and no signing off. Called themselves the Republic in 1894. 1.2 million acres overtaken from the native Hawaiians. When they resisted, the West retaliated in violence and erasure. The Hawaiian language is banned as part of colonialism's plan to expand, yeah.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. The work of all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. We will.
So if you put Hawaii into perspective, well, Black and Asian history is interconnected. Considering the fight with the Pacific, then of course versus Asia, they was treated as a middleman for war, but didn't let the Western colorism run its course. Cause dark skin was a sign of dignity to core. The land was taken in the name of capitalism, when prior to it was an actual kingdom. Clap back at the system.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. The work of all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If they won't tell it, we will. We will.